All right, you guys, we're going to actually begin our anatomy first unit today, and we're just going to do some introductory stuff, talking about body planes, different terms like that. What you will learn as you watch these videos, if you have to catch up or you need to go back and look, is that you won't see me like you do in class. You'll actually see the PowerPoints on the board, and I'll be talking to you about them. So, as we get started here, I'll get the camera focused on the smart board and get the lights turned out, and then we will get going, okay? All right, so let's get started. And it takes me a second to focus this thing because I'm not great with it still. All right, you guys, let me go turn the lights off and get this presentation started, and we'll get going. So we're going to talk about structural units and just kind of a basic overview or introduction to anatomy. Oh, it helps if I turn the overhead on where you can actually see. So while we're waiting for that to heat up, we're going to be talking about different branches of anatomy, physiology, and just different things that we utilize as far as anatomy is concerned in the beginning. When we will start at the cellular level this year, and it will go from the cellular level, we will go up to cells, tissues, organs, and then organ systems, and then the body as a whole. So we'll be utilizing all that kind of good stuff to learn all of the function of the body. We will take tests by unit. Although this particular unit, I usually throw the first two units in together, just because most of you have had a lot of this stuff in another class, because you had principles, or you had some other science class like biology that teaches you this basic information. So, we're going to talk about the branches of anatomy. The different branches of anatomy are gross anatomy. Gross anatomy is just basically looking at the outside structures and the major functions of the body. It's looking at the skin, it's looking at your muscle system, it's looking at the big systems of the body. We're looking at what you see. Then we have microscopic anatomy. That's pretty much self-explanatory. That's looking at you from the cellular level, what we can see with the microscope. Then there's developmental anatomy. Developmental anatomy is anatomy across the lifespan. So that would be from birth through the geriatric years to death. So birth to death, that's what developmental anatomy is. Comparative anatomy is when they compare human anatomy to the anatomy of other species. And then systematic anatomy is studying just a specific system, like the respiratory, and then comparing that to the cardiac system and how do they function together. So that would be your systematic anatomy. So anatomic terminology. You guys, I'm going to tell you, we will refer to things in this class based on anatomical and on medical terminology. We will not refer to things in any way other than what would be appropriate for anatomy. So let's think a little bit about how the systems work. So terms referring to location. Anterior or ventral is the front. Anterior is the front of the body, posterior is the back, dorsal refers to the tail. So anterior or ventral is the front. Dorsal is like the tail end or the back, and also posterior is the back. Cranial would be your skull, related to the skull, and caudal would be related to the spinal column, that kind of thing. Superior is anything above the waist, inferior would be below, or anything close to the insertion point. So say the superior part of my arm would be my shoulder and my bicep and my deltoid area, which you'll learn all those muscles if you don't already know them. So superior would be above, inferior but would be below. Those are terms you guys are going to need to know because we will refer to things in that manner. And you might have to label things in that manner. Some other medical terms that are important, and these refer to location, position, or direction. Medial means middle. Lateral means outside. Proximal means close to as well. And distal means far away at the end. So I always remember distal means distance. Distance would be away. So I'll remember distal, and then the opposite of distal would be proximal. Like I said, medial is middle, lateral is the outside. Superficial is the uppermost part, and external would be the uppermost part. Deep or internal would be inside. So you want to remember that sometimes we have what's called deep tissue injuries. Those would be some pretty severe, pretty long term, take a long time to heal. Some of you may have had deep tissue injuries. Now we're going to talk about the body planes. The body planes, that is how the body is actually cut, just like that. Like when you learn the different types of planes in math, we have planes on our body. So a sagittal plane basically cuts the body into left and right sections. Mid-sagittal plane cuts the body into equal left and right sections. So a line that runs from the top of my head, down the middle of my nose, the middle of my mouth, and the middle of my chin, down the absolute middle of my body would be a mid-sagittal plane. But you could have a plane that ran to the left or to the side of the ear, but removed the left arm off of the body and part of the spleen, part of the left side of the body. So it would still cut it into left and right sections. That would be a sagittal plane. Mid-sagittal plane is the middle part of the body into left and right sections. Coronal or frontal plane would basically cut the body lengthwise into front and back sections. So a coronal plane separates the body into front and back sections. And the transverse cuts the body into superior and inferior, so a top and a bottom half. You guys are going to take some time and actually look at what that looks like and use models to kind of demonstrate those planes. But sagittal is a left and right section. Mid-sagittal is equal left and right sections. Coronal cuts the body into a front and back. Transverse, a top and a bottom. And we're going to talk about the body cavity. So your dorsal cavity would be, think about what the dorsal cavity, we talked about dorsal. Dorsal would be the cavity of the brain and the spinal column itself. That would be your dorsal cavity. Then you have a separate cavity inside that, which would be your cranial cavity. That houses the brain. That's the skull that houses the brain. You have a spinal cavity, and that houses your spinal column. Your thoracic cavity is the things that are housed between the diaphragm and inside the lungs. So that would be your chest cavity. Thoracic cavity is your chest cavity, all the way around. Then those cavities are that thoracic cavity is broken down into further cavities. You also have an abdominal pelvic cavity. So that would be from the diaphragm down to the bottom of the pelvis. You have an abdominal cavity, which is just the abdomen, and then you have the pelvic cavity, which would just be those organs in the pelvic cavity. So I'm going to take us back a section, and I want us to talk a second about that thoracic cavity. So what's in your thoracic cavity? In your thoracic cavity, you have your heart, which would have a pericardium, or the cardiac cavity, the pericardium. Then you have each lung has a pleural cavity, and then you have another cavity in there. It's also sometimes referred to the mediastinum. That would be the cavity inside the thoracic cavity. So you have the mediastinum, which is inside the thoracic cavity. You have two pleural cavities, one for each lung. And then you have a pericardial cavity, which is the cavity that houses the heart. They all have their own sac, basically. Inside your abdominal cavity, you're going to have your stomach. You're going to have your intestines. You're going to have your liver, your spleen, your gallbladder, and your pancreas. Those would be in your abdominal cavity. And in your pelvic cavity, you have your reproductive organs and your kidneys. Your urethra, your bladder. Those are going to be in your pelvic cavity. So your abdominal pelvic cavity houses all those organs. And yes, I may ask you on a test question which of the following organs are found in the pelvic cavity. Or I may ask you which of the following cavities houses all of the following organs. So know what organs are found in the cavities. Talk about regions of the abdomen. So you have the upper epigastric, the upper area or the epigastric area. That would be the top two quadrants of the abdomen, and then you have lower quadrants of the abdomen. And so you have the right side and the left side. You have the right hypochondriac region and the left hypochondriac region. Those are on the upper area. What I want you to remember most about your abdominal pelvic cavity and about your epigastric region is that as far as healthcare is concerned, you have four quadrants. You have the upper right, the upper left, the lower right, the lower left. And then you have the middle region, which is your umbilical region. And then it can be broken down into your right lumbar and your lower lumbar. Those would be the lower regions. Then you have your lower hypogastric region, your right iliac, and your left iliac region, which would be the lower section. So you're going to have, but for our class purposes, we are really going to look at the upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left, as far as how we describe things, because that's kind of how your organs are more likely to be housed. You do have some important arteries in the umbilical area. We'll refer to those more. You guys are going to see those in detail as you go through and you look at your anatomical models. Or if you're watching this as a makeup, then you're going to actually see videos that demonstrate it. So smaller cavities, the body still has a few smaller cavities. Your orbital cavity, that would be your eye, where your eyes are housed. Your nasal cavity, that would be the cavity from the outside of your nose or your nares that runs back into the throat. And your buccal cavity. Your buccal cavity is basically your intestine, because it is that moist cavity that starts in your mouth, and it has that mucosal membrane, and it runs all the way through your GI tract. You will learn more about that later. So your buccal cavity would be the cavity that has a mucous membrane that runs throughout the body. Nasal cavities in the nose. Orbital cavity would be where your eyes are housed. So what are the functions of life? We do lots of things. Our body has to do lots of things to continue to live. And like I said, this is a basic overview. We go into all of these things in detail throughout the year. We have to move with our muscular system. We have ingestion, which would be with our oral cavity, or our nasal cavity, because we ingest air as well. So we get air and food in through ingestion. We digest foods and other nutrients, break them down, and then they're transported through the body via our bloodstream so that we can get nutrition to our body. And we break things down into smaller molecules through synthesis. We assimilate them. We assimilate those molecules into things that we can actually use to help us grow. Things that we don't use, we secrete or excrete, so we sweat them out when we secrete them, or they come out through our skin in other manners, and we excrete them via urine and stool to get rid of things we can't use. We have a regulatory system in our body called our buffer system, and then we also can reproduce. Those are all functions of life that are necessary. Human development. In early human development, certain groups of cells become highly specialized for specific functions. So when you are an embryo, you are a clump of unspecialized cells. And then they start to continually reproduce, and then they become a heart, and they become lungs, and they become other organs in the body. They become a brain, they become a nervous system, they become a circulatory system. So you start from that minimal amount of cells, and then you develop into this human being that you become. As cells become specialized, they take on their shape and size. Like I said, they become those tissues and those organs. So cells become tissues, tissues become organs, organs become organ systems, and then they become the human body. Do remember the 4 processes that are necessary for life: metabolism, anabolism, not cannibalism, anabolism, catabolism, and homeostasis. I want you guys to take a minute and think about what each one of those mean and why are they important to the body. So why would they be important to the body? Why would metabolism, anabolism, catabolism, and homeostasis, why would they be important to the body? You have to have the other 3 to have homeostasis, and for your body to continue to live, you have to either get to or do your best to stay in a state of homeostasis so that the body can function. If we do not have the ability to function the way we need to, our body will shut down and it will die. Okay, guys, I want you to remember that homeostasis is a state of homeostasis is necessary for us to function. If you have any questions, please let me know. You guys are going to have some time to utilize models or watch videos related to models demonstrating these properties, and then you're going to have lab activities related to them for later. So you guys have a good day, and I will be back with you a little later. Thanks, guys.